Good evening and welcome to Chicago Tonight. I'm Brandis Friedman.
And I'm Paris Schutz. On the show tonight.
When does this really stop? When does the punishment stop?
The third installment of our permanent punishment series on how getting work is harder for people with criminal records.
A new report gives us a better look into the state of homelessness in Chicago and how that can take on different forms.
A bipartisan effort to stop future attempts at overturning presidential elections. We explore the proposed changes to the Electoral Count Act.
Budgets are not just math problems. They are and must be value statements.
Could Mayor Lightfoot's budget proposal help her secure a second term? Our Spotlight Politics team digs into that and more.
And decades of memories of the Chicago International Film Fest in a new memoir. We speak with the festival's founder.
But first, some of today's top stories. Chicago police have shot a person inside a West Side police station. The shooting happened inside CPD's 10th District Station on Ogden Avenue. Superintendent David Brown says 3 officers fired at the offender, hitting the person at least once. Officers say they recovered a firearm at the scene.
One of the officers immediately see what appears to be a barrel of a gun protruding from the wrapped plastic bag that the offender is holding in his hand.
Brown says the person is in stable condition and no officers were injured. The Civilian Office of Police Accountability is investigating the shooting. It's the second time in 10 days a shooting has occurred inside a department facility.
Another well-known company is moving jobs out of Chicago. Tyson Foods says it's moving about 500 corporate jobs out of its offices in Chicago and Downers Grove to its headquarters in Arkansas. Tyson's time in Chicago began in 2014 when the company acquired Hillshire Brands. The company's exodus comes as Citadel, Boeing, and Caterpillar all have announced moves out of the city this year.
More than 40,000 runners are expected to race in the Bank of America Chicago Marathon on Sunday. And this year, the marathon is including a division for non-binary runners. That makes it the second major marathon to include such a division. However, as the Chicago Sun-Times reports, the change was made without a public announcement or statement.
And coming up in the program, we'll explore a new report on the state of homelessness in Chicago.
But up next, the third part in our permanent punishment series looks at employment hurdles facing people with criminal records. Stay with us.
Chicago Tonight is made possible in part by Alexandra and John Nichols, the Jim and Kay Mabey family, the Polk Brothers Foundation, and the support of these donors.
Earlier this week, we told you how there are an estimated 1,300 permanent punishments, laws, rules, and policies that apply to people with criminal records in Illinois. The majority of them are labor-related, making it harder for people with records to get hired. For example, an obscure one, the Professional Geologist Licensing Act, says the Department of Professional Regulation can refuse to issue or renew a license for any conviction or guilty plea for a felony, or separately, a misdemeanor related to the profession. Most of the people we met, though, aren't aiming to be geologists, but some might say the hurdles they have to leap to earn incomes are just as high. Kimberly Moss has high hopes, literally.
I want to be a tower crane operator. I'm not afraid of heights.
Yeesh. But she's working on getting the skills she needs from the Chicago Women in Trades training program.
You're only going to fix what's coming and not what's happened.
I love everything about the program. I love how they push you.
It's a solid position to be in after her previous struggles finding work.
I was working at the post office, and because of my background, they fired me.
How did that feel?
It broke me down. It put me into a depression, honestly, because the way they went about it, it could have changed. But, I mean, I guess it is what it is.
Her background involves a criminal record and time spent in and out of prison. Moss, like many people with similar backgrounds, battles to keep her past from holding her back, including her classmate Latifah Curry, who's been home for nearly 10 years after a drug felony.
I want to do stuff, but it's like every time I try to do it, it's like the background just messed me up, you know. So that's why I took this opportunity.
The Chicago Women in Trades training program is open to all women, but is especially helpful for women like Curry and Moss.
The trades are very felony friendly. They certainly do some background checks with certain job sites, schools, hospitals, the airport, that sort of thing. But there are a lot of opportunities for people who have a wide range of criminal background histories that they are able to come into the trades and earn really great wages and really great benefits.
But it's just one solution to a widespread problem.
In the state of Illinois, there are over 500 employment laws, policies, or sanctions, restrictions on the kinds of jobs people can have. If you include business licenses and property rights, that number jumps up to close to 900. That's one state. 900. That means there are entire categories of employment for which one need not apply.
One that many people who've been impacted by the criminal legal system say they face frequently. What other kind of jobs have you been denied because of your background?
Amazon, UPS, of course, banks and all that.
I filled out 32 applications in a week. 32 applications in a week.
Did you get any of those jobs?
No.
They shoot me down all the time because it was too felony. So when they see it, they deny me in the door.
To get around the regular rejection, many apply for jobs through temporary staffing agencies.
If they're working with a temp agency, they can get that immediate employment and fast.
Only to be let go once the background check reveals a criminal record.
I went through an agency to get the job, which you tell them you're a felon, which they don't have no problem placing you. But when the company wants to hire you on, they want to do an individual background check. And when they found out I was a felon, they were like, hey, you did a great job here at the warehouse, but shipping and receiving, but you gotta go.
Illinois law places myriad restrictions and requirements on employment for people with records, especially in park districts, schools, and healthcare settings.
I'm very sensitive about how I say this because, I don't want to stigmatize at all people who have been impacted by the criminal legal system, but it becomes like a social disability, and it becomes a social disability because of all the restrictions that people put in front of them.
And where they aren't absolutely barred from employment, it gets complicated. Background checks are required for most occupational licenses, for example, even to work in a casino. In some cases, the conviction has to be more than a certain number of years old to be considered for licensing. Certain convictions could mean the employee is eligible for a waiver to have certain jobs, and different state regulatory agencies are responsible for deciding whether different licenses are granted.
That's it. Back.
It all took Maria Garza 6 months to get a healthcare waiver to work as a receptionist in a clinic.
You go through a whole process of applications and essays and story writing, like changing the narrative of the charge of what happened that day and why I should be considered.
It can be a tough process to navigate for someone returning home from prison with limited access to resources or job training. All of that said, Illinois has made changes.
In March of 2021, the Illinois legislature created a new amendment to the Human Rights Act, specifically generally prohibiting employers from taking adverse action against a job candidate or an employee for a criminal conviction unless certain processes and procedures were in place.
Labor attorneys say those procedures are meant to make it harder for an employer to deny a job based solely on the existence of a record, which is, by the way, a civil rights violation.
They have to consider how long ago was the offense, what kind of rehabilitation have they had, are they working, are they a good steward, or And so we think that we've seen improvement in terms of the number of people who are able to get their licenses.
Employment attorney Jeff Risch even argues some employers would like to be able to hire non-traditional candidates for jobs, especially in a labor market where it's tough to find workers. He has an idea of what's holding them back.
We want to hire this individual, but because we don't have that civil immunity in hiring this individual, it's just too much of a risk.
That civil immunity would protect employers from liability, a lawsuit, if an employee does commit another crime on the job.
Fingers will be pointed at them, second guessing, well, why did you hire this individual in the first place? Why did you take that risk?
Many employers are avoiding the risk by simply not hiring people with criminal records.
We throw millions, if not billions, at alternative solutions, policing, and all these other things. And we know that's not working because we see it. It's time to go for an approach where we are investing not only in property, but people.
Kimberly Moss says she doesn't dwell on her criminal record.
I just try to stay out of trouble. I let the past be the past. I don't think about that stuff.
Instead, she focuses on the future she can build with help from a program like this.
5 years, Kim may have her own construction company. Kim might have her own youth organization to help individuals that are either incarcerated or going down that route. I plan on building my own shelter for Chicago. I just really hope and pray that I'm able to bless others as well as I'm being blessed.
And to be clear, the changes to the Human Rights Act allow a candidate who feels an employer has taken an adverse action against them because of their background to file a discrimination charge with the Illinois Department of Human Rights. Some employers focus specifically, though, on hiring people who are re-entering society after prison. Not only do they offer employment, but some offer needed wraparound services like assistance with childcare or transportation. So joining us to talk about providing services to people who are re-entering are Melissa Odell, Executive Director of Defy Ventures Illinois team, Jeff Korzenik, Chief Investment Strategist with Fifth Third Bank, and Zenobia Williams, Director of Employment Training with Growing Home. Thanks to all of you for joining us. We just heard from Javier Reyes in that piece that he applied for 32 jobs in 1 week, yet he was not able to gain employment. Zenobia, what are some of the barriers that you hear from people when it comes to applying for jobs?
Some of the barriers include homelessness, transportation issues, childcare issues, healthcare issues. Most people, returning citizens, aren't eligible for benefits. So they run into, health problems and just substance abuse. And something as simple as obtaining an ID could be a challenge for them.
Jeff Korzenik, from an employment market perspective, why do you think it's important for employers to hire people who are re-entering?
Well, it's in businesses' own interests because we have a labor shortage of historic proportions that's not going away. We're still losing baby boomers, and we didn't have enough births 20 and 30 years ago to replace them. So we can't, in the business community, overlook talent anywhere it can be found. But you need the process for how do you find who's going to be a good fit and what do you have to do to help them thrive. So it's a talent model, but that has to be targeted to this population.
Melissa, Defy Ventures starts working with people on job skills while they're still in prison. Tell us a little bit about your work and the benefit of starting with folks while they're still incarcerated.
Yes, thank you. So we have a proprietary curriculum. It's called CEO of Your New Life. And so it's really focused on employment readiness, personal development and well-being, reentry support, and entrepreneurship. And what we found is that if you start building relationships with people while they're inside and you start changing thinking, you'll ultimately change behaviors. And the other aspect is that we invite members of the business community to come inside and actually meet our folks and get to know them and have more of an empathetic exchange, because it's harder to stigmatize someone or condemn someone when you actually get to know them and hear the circumstances that brought them into the system in the first place. I think that we know that it's not really the most equitable system, and the legal system can really penalize people and hurt them in ways that are long-lasting.
Zenobia, Growing Home, you all have a farm in Inglewood. What are the services that you provide for people who are re-entering?
So we have a 12-week paid job readiness training program. And what's unique about the program is that they have an opportunity to work on our 1.5-acre farm. We are the first and only USDA organic certified farm in the city of Chicago. They learn about agriculture. They learn all of job readiness skills. We partner with CGLA to help them to get their records sealed and expunged. We provide support services, direct support services that could provide some of those transportation issues. Even if they have a car that breaks down, we can support them in getting those vehicles fixed so they can return to work. We also provide, once they're placed into employment, we provide 30, 60, 90, and 1 year support for them with a paid incentive if they reach those milestones. So we provide wraparound services to them. Once they become a member of our program, they're a part of Growing Home for Life, and we do whatever we can to support them in their employment.
Zenobia, what kind of wraparound services, and you just named some of the ones that you all provide, but what should employers be considering?
So a lot of people who are going back into the workforce, who've been probably, out of work for a long period of time, they don't have housing. They don't have child care. They need to they're reconnecting back with their families and their communities. And we can assure them that, we can provide support services for them. So some of those worries and things that they struggle with to get to work and to maintain housing, we can provide those for them. Even if there's some disciplinary actions that happen with them being tardy or health issues that may arise, we're there to support them and let the company know that we're going to support them in every way that we can.
Jeff, you've written about how there are some practices that businesses have used that don't work. What are some of those? Tell us what not to do.
I think the most important thing not to do is think that this is a labor source of last resort. If you don't go looking for talent, you won't find talent. And many businesses have seen a model that really is just looking for cheap labor instead of looking for quality. So that's a really critical element. The other really important factor is even if you are able to identify who's going to be who can be a good fit for your company, you have to recognize the need for these wraparound services for many people. Often it has nothing to do with a criminal record, everything to do with deep poverty and lack of knowledge of how to work. People are willing to work, but they need a little bit of help to get there, to know what the rules are and how to perform appropriately. When you offer that, you get an exceptionally engaged and loyal employee, and that's what every business is looking for.
Melissa, tell us a little bit about the importance of creating relationships between business owners and the people who are inside prison.
Yeah, I think that, what really matters is when people can see each other as human beings, right? And so that's why our model starts inside, and we're inviting the business community to come in and really get to know the people and their stories and give them support and coaching along the way. So while individuals are in our program, we call them EITs, or Entrepreneurs in Training, they're learning all new skills. They're learning also how to view themselves as not just a number, but actually as somebody who has skills and talents, and they can bring those to bear. And so when the business community comes in and validates that and gives them coaching and mentorship on their resume, personal statement, and their business ideas, you start seeing that there is an opportunity for wholeness, for a reconciliation, and that's really powerful.
Zenobia, how can employers create supportive environments for people after incarceration?
Sure, they can. Well, one thing that Growing Home does is that our job readiness training program provides some of those skills that were mentioned earlier so that they'll understand what it's like to work full time and some of the challenges or things that they work through. We also provide certifications for them already in advance so that when they go into the job, they're already prepared and certified to do the work. I think when you provide an opportunity when an employer provides an opportunity for someone who has been incarcerated and they're returning citizens, I think patience is one thing and understanding that, yes, they are human beings.
Jeff, we've got about 30 seconds left. We just heard from another Jeff in the piece, Jeff Risch, speaking about civil immunity. I know you're not an attorney necessarily, but do you think employers carry any resistance because of the risk?
They carry lots of resistance. Often it's objections that have to be raised but can be effectively dealt with. In the case of negligent hiring liability, which was the reference there, the process is your protection. You don't have to hire everyone who comes through your door. You just have to be open to finding the people who are ready. And if you have a process that documents that you have examined the risks, you've examined the specific individual characteristics, you have a great degree of protection.
Okay, that's where we'll have to leave it. My thanks to the three of you for joining us, Zenobia Williams, Jeff Korzenik, and Melissa Odell.
Thank you.
And in the interest of full disclosure, we should note Fifth Third is a supporter of WTTW News. Up next, the state of homelessness in Chicago. Stay with us.
Previous tallies have put Chicago's homeless population at around 5,000 people. But a new report by the Chicago Coalition for the Homeless says the real number is closer to nearly 66,000. Statewide, almost 110,000 people experienced homelessness by temporarily staying with others. And nearly 40,000 Illinois public school students experienced homelessness as well. And joining us are Sam Carlson, Manager of Research and Outreach at Chicago Coalition for the Homeless, and Honey Harris, member of the Bring Chicago Home Coalition. Welcome both of you to Chicago tonight. Sam Carlson, to that discrepancy, the Housing and Urban Development Agency had put that number around 5,300. Your study says it's actually closer to 66,000. Break that down for us.
So HUD mandates an annual point-in-time count, which usually happens in January of every year, and it's capturing homelessness at a moment in time. Chicago Coalition for the Homeless doesn't see that as reflective of the total scope of homelessness, so we look at it from a different perspective, looking at it from the over the course of the calendar year, and including people that are temporarily staying with others or couch surfing, which we've seen as the most common form of homelessness in Chicago.
So that represents about tens of thousands of folks here, people that, another term I've heard for this, Honey Harris, is doubling up, and that's the way that you've been for the last few years. You've stayed with your sister, you've stayed at a shelter, and now with your son. What do you want folks to know about that kind of living situation?
It is very difficult. Just imagine you are an adult and you have to make that text. I always have to do it 2 weeks because I didn't want to hear the dread in her voice that here my older sister has to come live with me again. And sometimes it was when my boys were smaller. We would all have to sleep on her floor and get up in the morning, just always never feeling quite at home. Like, she was never horrible to us, but you know, iron wears out. She wanted her place back, and so it was always a relief when I could get my own place. And then I had to live with her during COVID, and that was difficult because there was no leaving out because everybody had to stay in. So every time she came home from work, I would just feel like I want to climb into the wall. And when she would be getting ready for work, I would just lay there silently because this is your home. I don't want to interrupt your routine. So emotionally, it's horror.
So as you mentioned, doubling up, you can't stay in any one place for a long period of time because at some point, I guess the patience of the person is going to run out.
You have to leave, you know, but luckily we were able to get an apartment May of 2020 because my oldest son had come from a visit from New York. He's a photographer, and then the world just say, hey, you can't go anywhere. So we ended up getting an apartment May. I've been with him ever since, gratefully. He's taking care of the bills.
And Sam Carlson, the mayor this week proposed an extra $10 million in funding for homelessness. I'm not sure exactly how it breaks down for services. Is that enough?
Definitely not. There are 65,000 people experiencing homelessness in the city right now, and there have been small investments like this from year to year, but what we need is more than that. We need dedicated funding toward homelessness and housing solutions, and $10 million isn't it.
And Honey, what does that look like in terms of dedicated funding? What does it need to go toward?
It needs to go to finding people stable, affordable housing, plus wraparound services. So because a lot of people may get housing, but wraparound services will make sure that you keep your housing. Like in my situation, I've worked, but because of weight gain and arthritis, I can no longer do the jobs I used to do. So someone like me, I need computer training because my field was the food industry. And even me trying to get managerial jobs, you have to be proficient in Microsoft. You know, when I started, everything was on paper. And you can't fake computer work. You have to really know this. So they would take somebody like me, find me training. You know, I mean, I know how to write a resume. I know how to give great interviews. But if I don't have those skills, I'm still without an income.
Job training, a huge part of it. Sam Carlson, there has been this proposal to add an additional tax on high-end properties, an additional real estate transfer tax that would bring in about $160 million per year for the city to address homelessness. What kind of impact would that have?
That could effectively end homelessness in 10 years. So housing 65,000 people from one year to the next is pretty big feat, but over the course of 10 years, we could effectively end homelessness in Chicago with $160 million a year.
And Honey Harris, these studies that we're looking at were out in 2020, or they looked at 2020. Now we've had the pandemic. How do you think the pandemic and the shutdowns have exacerbated homelessness?
No, it's actually worse because you already had homeless people. A lot of people are mentally dealing with stuff of have to be alone, not having people around them. Then a lot of jobs are no longer, so it's going to be more people. And so that's why it is just important that the mayor puts this on a ballot. It's simple. We just need her to put it on the ballot.
Right. This is a referendum.
Yes.
The proposal would be to put this referendum on the ballot, and the voters would choose to have this extra real estate transfer tax for homelessness. What about the 10,000 or so Illinoisans, according to this study, that on any given night really do not have any place to stay? Are there enough beds for them?
So there certainly aren't enough beds for them, and this Bring Chicago Home campaign would impact Chicago specifically. There still needs to be work done at the state level.
You say Bring Chicago Home, that ordinance you're talking about.
Yeah. Bring Chicago Home would raise the real estate transfer tax by 1.9 percentage points and dedicate that revenue yearly to fund housing solutions.
All right, well, we'll keep watching that proposal, and we thank you for being here, Sam Carlson and Honey Harris. We appreciate it.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you for having us.
And now, Brandis, we toss it back to you.
Paris, thank you. Still to come on Chicago Tonight, the Electoral Count Act was established in 1887, and today, a bipartisan group of lawmakers seeks to make changes. The Latino Leadership Council wants Congressman Chuy Garcia to run for mayor, but does Garcia want to? Our Spotlight Politics team weighs in. And the founder of the Chicago International Film Festival on 57 years of movie premieres and stargazing here in Chicago. But first, some more of today's top stories. A 22-year-old man has been arrested and charged for a shooting that injured a 7-year-old boy who was on his way to church with his family. The boy was in a vehicle with 6 other people, including his parents. Police say Kentrell Gaden fired multiple shots using a rifle-style firearm, hitting the vehicle and striking the child in his lower body. Prosecutors say the boy has a long recovery ahead. Gaden is due back in court next week. Republicans are pushing against the implementation of the Safety Act set to take effect January 1st, saying it adds to the burden already on Illinois taxpayers.
Illinois already has the second highest property taxes in the nation. And now with the highest inflation in 40 years, this is not the time to add to our highest in the nation overall tax burden.
Illinois House Republicans, including leader Jim Durkin, argue the law puts a financial strain on smaller communities, and the investments needed to keep up with the law would strain safety budgets for local municipalities and counties. The sweeping criminal justice and police reform package includes, among other items, the ending of cash bail. For more on the political fight over the law, you can visit our website. Another well-known corporation in Chicago is hitting the road. Tyson Foods says it's moving about 500 corporate jobs out of its offices in Chicago and Downers Grove. The company, known for its chicken processing and packaged food brands, says it's moving the jobs to its headquarters in Arkansas. Tyson's exodus comes as Citadel, Boeing, and Caterpillar all announced moves out of the city this year. And do you think you have what it takes to be the next singing sensation in Chicago? As a way to get out of the pandemic funk, officials are announcing a citywide karaoke contest to encourage people to visit bars and clubs. 21 and over, please. The Chicago Sings karaoke competition kicks off October 9th across 18 neighborhood venues. Each location will choose a semifinalist to advance to the next round on October 23rd, and the final round will take place November 6th. The winner gets $5 grand and, of course, bragging rights. And if you need some inspiration, head over to our website for a ranking of Time Out's best karaoke songs ever. And now to Paris and a move to stop future efforts to overturn elections. Paris.
Brandis, a bipartisan group of lawmakers is proposing to protect future elections. This after the numerous revelations of a fake elector scheme leading up to the January 6th insurrection at the Capitol, and as election deniers in many races aim to win positions of power. In the Senate, the bill is being led by Republican Senator Susan Collins and Democrat Joe Manchin, and it has won a key endorsement from Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell. And joining us to break down what the Electoral Count Reform Act is and what this all means is Professor Michael Kang of Northwestern University's School of Law. Professor Kang, welcome back to Chicago Tonight. First of all, remind us the loopholes in the current Electoral Count Act that the former president tried to exploit and that this bill would address.
I think the main loophole that Donald Trump tried to exploit is that the vice president seemed to have potentially some discretion in deciding which votes to count. And I think Trump wanted Pence to exercise the discretion to turn the election over to him. The reform bills try to seal up some of that discretion and make clear that the vice president's authority would only be ministerial.
So clearing that up, even though the vice president's reading of the law at that time was that it was ministerial, but this is basically solidifying that. What are some of the other main components of this bill?
There's a few different things that try to clear up some ambiguities in the Electoral Count Act. One is to raise the threshold for objections. There was potentially a problem where one member of each house could raise an objection and gum up the process for the counting of the presidential electors. Depending on the bill, the threshold is much higher now. It also limits the extension of a presidential election to catastrophic events. I think in the past, there's potentially an interpretation of the Electoral Count Act and some other federal law that would have opened up the possibility that state legislatures could kind of jump in and override the outcome of an election. While that was a long shot, I think the reform bills are trying to seal up some of those potential loopholes.
And what about the notion of dealing with alternate slates of electors, fake electors, and certifying the actual electors that represent the results in the state?
Yeah, I think the Electoral Count Act is really designed to try to clarify what happens when you've got multiple slates of electors. So the Electoral Count Act was a little less ambiguous with respect to that. But I think clarifying what the vice president's authority is, clarifying the objections in each house actually go a pretty long way toward cleaning up that process and making sure that if you've got multiple sets of electors, it really is the slate that's certified by the governor. There's a provision in some of the reform bills for judicial review of some of those decisions, which wasn't as clear before. So I think the problem of potentially having multiple slates of electors coming to Congress and to the vice president have improved and been clarified. Where there was some fuzziness in exactly what would happen, some of those rules have been hardened up and made clear exactly what should happen.
And there are two different versions. There's a House version and a Senate version. Are there major discrepancies between these two bills?
I don't think there's really major discrepancies. They kind of cover a lot of the same bases. You can kind of quibble about which one you like more, whether the threshold for objections ought to be, 20% of each house or a third of each house. But I think they hit kind of the main points, which is to clarify the rules, make sure the vice president's authority is ministerial and doesn't exercise a bunch of discretion, and make it harder for state legislatures or members of Congress without kind of wider support or some sort of catastrophic event that would really justify a deeper intervention to try to make the process go smoother and less prone to kind of frivolous objections, marginal claims of election fraud, all of those things. I think the door is a lot tighter and harder to bring up those kinds of claims to gum up the process on January 6th.
And this bill deals largely with the congressional role here, but we know that each state is responsible for administering its own elections. So what potential problems do you see upcoming either in 2022, 24 at the state level and ways that the process might be subverted at the state level?
Yeah, I think it's an important point that all this reform to Electoral Count Act really only affect the federal process for counting presidential electors. And it really doesn't touch any of the potential problems we've seen in 2020 and we anticipate in 2024 under state law. And I think the basic problem is that there's a lot of room for discretion for different elements of the process, different decision makers in the process to raise objections, claims of voter fraud. And really, we haven't seen a lot of improvement at the state level to the laws. And in fact, I think there's a lot of worry among academics, advocates, people who work in election administration that 2020 was a kind of dress rehearsal. And now we see exactly what were the key decisions in 2020. And those might be vulnerable points where if you get the right person to claim election fraud or object or not certify an election, somewhere up in the process, it could create really big problems in 2024. They weren't problems in 2020, but now that we have a little bit of experience with the election process and what the weak points are, someone could really raise problems by affecting that process a little bit differently in 2024 than they did in 2020.
Right, and again, the bill says that the governor is solely responsible for certifying the elections, but it doesn't say anything about, say, the governor of a certain state doesn't want to certify the results of the election based on the way the vote went. What about the role of the courts in this process? Does the bill say anything about that?
Yeah, the bills make clear that we're going to have judicial review as part of this entire process. I think there are going to be some questions potentially where the courts are going to be hesitant to jump in based on essentially kind of separation of powers worries. But what we have here is Congress trying to make clear that there is judicial review available both at the state and federal level for a lot of these kinds of objections. So it's trying to hedge against the worry that state legislators, as they did in 2020, argue that they have kind of autonomy when it comes to election administration, election rules, and really shouldn't have courts butting in and trying to impose constitutional restrictions and other sorts of legal restrictions on their ability to kind of decide what should happen with the election. This bill deals a little bit with that when it comes to the counting of the presidential electors, but it doesn't really touch the rest of elections, whether it's congressional, state, local elections. All of those objections are still clear, still out there, and some maybe arguably not subject to judicial review, depending on how far you want to take some of those.
In the state administration of elections, an issue going before the Supreme Court in this term, so we'll watch all of that. But for now, our thanks to Michael Kang from Northwestern. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
And up next, our Spotlight Politics team on the mayor's budget proposal. But first, we take a look at the weather.
Mayor Lori Lightfoot proposes a budget she hopes will carry her to a second term. Meanwhile, the Latino Leadership Council is encouraging Congressman Chuy Garcia to enter the race for mayor, and an effort to ensure people arrested get a phone call within 3 hours. Here with all that and more is our Spotlight Politics team, Paris Schutz, Amanda Vinicky, and Heather Sharon, live and in living color. Welcome back, gang. So before we get into the budget, let's just hear a little bit of what Mayor Lightfoot had to say when she unveiled the proposal.
But as you know, budgets are not just math problems. They are and must be value statements. Value statements about how and why we invest, and importantly in this city, where we invest.
So, Heather, you were at City Hall for the mayor's budget address on Monday. What stood out for you?
Well, that there is no property tax hike, no fee increases, no fine increases. This is clearly an election year budget that she wants to get through the city council smooth as silk so everybody can turn their attention to the elections in February, which might seem like it's a long way away. I'm here to tell you that, unfortunately, it is not.
Seems a little convenient, doesn't it? Were there any surprises?
You know, there was a big surprise that the mayor wants to make a pension payment of nearly $200 million to basically pay down the high-interest credit card debt that the city has taken out over the past several decades to start getting ahead of the city's pension debt. And that's after climbing the pension ramp, which, as I remind everybody all the time, former Mayor Rahm Emanuel thought the city needed to borrow $10 billion to get ahead of. Now, the city has paid what it's required to pay, and the mayor says it's time to get ahead of that. That is going to be a big subject of debate because you can either spend that $200 million on pensions or you can spend it on direct services, the kind that people will vote for elected officials on election day.
So, Paris, as Heather said, it's an election year budget, and of course, you know, it shows with the previous planned property tax hike stripped out. But is this a budget that, you know, most members of the city council will find easy to back?
Well, there's two things those members don't want to have to vote for: tax hikes and big-time budget cuts. And so far as we know, this budget includes none of those things. In fact, it's a good news budget. There's a surplus of revenue going to all kinds of programs. So the mayor has had some difficulty passing much more difficult budgets in the past, but she has gotten them through narrowly. I would assume because of her track record, because of the nature of this budget, this should not be that big of a challenge.
Well, I mean, we're not going to forget that she originally called for a property tax increase and then stripped it out, but voters will. I mean, that's not going to be something that comes up at election time. I do think Heather hit on it. The big fight is going to be whether to put more money into these social services, because that's not just something that sits well with voters. That's something that members of the city council have ran on and are really going to be looking for, and that, in a way, Lightfoot herself has promised.
The fiscal watchdogs will think that that is a very smart and prudent move, and so it seems like it's not a political decision here. This is a decision in the best interest of the long-term finances of the city.
Which politicians don't often
Right. That's why we're in this situation.
All that said, is this going to help Lightfoot get reelected?
Well, she is certainly hoping that it will, and I think she wants to demonstrate that she can get along with the city council. I will, who's to forget that after she passed her first budget, she put up a website saying, hey, these people voted against my budget, send them an email and tell them what you think about them. She wants the ability to sort of push this through and to show that she can get along with these older people, and it's not going to erupt into a screaming match, which has happened more than once on the floor of the city council.
Despite the fact that, of course, all of this complicated by how many members of the city council are running against her for that very job, they could use this opportunity, frankly, every opportunity they can, to make a big stink.
And separately, during the budget address earlier this week, Heather, there were protests at City Hall from anti-homelessness advocates. What was the scene there, and what were the activists calling for?
Well, they really want the mayor to fulfill her 2019 campaign pledge to change the city's real estate transfer tax. So when you buy or sell a home, you pay a tax to the state, and the city gets a little bit, the county gets a little bit. Right now, everybody pays the same amount. You buy a $300,000 house, it's the same tax as if you buy a $1 million house. So these advocates want wealthy people who are buying massive homes to pay more, and to use that extra revenue to help people get out of homelessness, address their mental health care, all sorts of different issues. So that's what they were calling for. The mayor dropped that promise as soon as she took office, saying that there were just other needs in the city, that the city needed. The advocates say now is the time, and they point to just the red-hot real estate market that has sent literally hundreds of millions of dollars into the city's treasury, and they say that missed opportunity should stop now.
So moving from the budget to the mayor's race, the Latino Leadership Council is encouraging U.S. House Representative Jesus Chuy Garcia to join the race for mayor. This is despite donating to Lightfoot's re-election campaign. Heather, what's going on there? Are they just hedging bets?
Well, I think there's part of that. I think there's also a sense that Chuy Garcia is somebody who could unite the Chicago Latino community. He would, of course, be the first Latino mayor. Already running is Alderman Ray Lopez, who would also be the first Latino mayor. But Chuy's a big name. Everybody remembers his 2015 run against Rahm Emanuel. Everybody loves the mustache. And, he is a progressive who can sort of harken back to his friendship with Harold Washington and sort of, bring all of those good feelings back. Now, is he going to run? We don't know yet. A month ago, he said it was 50-50, and maybe he would decide by the middle of October. Well, we're pretty close to the middle of October, so he's going to have to decide one way or the other. But I think it speaks to a larger dissatisfaction in the Latino community with Lori Lightfoot, especially when it comes to the ward remap, where Latino aldermen tried, and failed to get really the number of wards that the city's Latino population should reflect.
As you mentioned, when Chuy ran against Rahm back in 2015, he, lost to the former mayor, of course, but he had the backing at the time of CTU. We already know this time CTU has already backed or endorsed Brandon Johnson. I mean,
even though he's not declared as a candidate.
Even though he is not officially declared yet, right? Even though he's feeling the pressure, Paris, have we gotten any indication that Chuy himself wants to run for mayor.
I don't think we know. I think there's some personal considerations he's weighing. I think he might be weighing the fact that the congressional midterms are coming up. Maybe he wants to wait till after that. But then there's just 3 weeks to go until you have to get your petitions in. So he's got to put those petitions out there, get 12,500 valid signatures. That's a long, arduous process because you really got to get 3 times that amount for them to be good. And as far as we know, he doesn't have those circulating right now. So if he doesn't run, there's folks waiting in the wings like former Governor Pat Quinn. He is already circulating petitions. He hasn't made his decision yet, but there are petitions and signatures that he's out there gathering in case he decides to get into the race.
And Garcia's path is certainly more difficult without the backing of CTU, both money and then the soldiers, kind of the foot army that you need to go and get and collect all of those signatures. That said, he has been sort of a kingmaker on the progressive front. You look back to elections in 2018, 2020, and this past election, even in the primary, where he's really helped to get some people in office. So he's got some folks that owe him, and certainly
he's got some chips he can cash in.
He's got some chips to cash in, and I think you're right, Heather. It's not just with the ward maps. There's certainly a sense among some in the Latino community that they've been sort of pushed aside. Looking at, again, we're looking at the Illinois Supreme Court, where there's frustration by the Latinos that another black justice was appointed instead of a Latino. There is some sort of racial division going on.
Absolutely. Amanda, so we also had news this week that in the second quarter of the year, the value of Illinois' economy passed $1 trillion with a T dollars for the first time. So if the economy is stronger than ever post-pandemic, wouldn't that seem to benefit the incumbents like Governor Pritzker and the mayor?
It might. I'm not sure how much people really are paying attention to this. A bit on that study, it came from a group that's a bit left-leaning. Illinois is now the 5th state to cross that mark. And sure, it sounds good. Could we see it in a campaign commercial? Sure. We also know, however, that Illinois is lagging, the economy is lagging behind that of other states nationally. So it's sort of you can celebrate a win, but detractors have plenty to say about Illinois' economy, manufacturing, and particularly downstate. That's where we see, we're going to see this come to the forefront, particularly in the governor's race, where Darren Bailey's going to do great downstate. Pritzker will be the opposite. He's going to carry Chicago. You see that division of Illinois really playing out in stark terms in economic reports such as this.
So, Heather, moving on to policing, under the terms of the consent decree, the Chicago Police Department has agreed to ensure that people who are arrested are given access to a phone within 3 hours. Cook County Public Defender Sharon Mitchell described this agreement as historic and hard-won. Why has this been so difficult?
Well, because Chicago police have a long history of not giving people access to a telephone call after they've been arrested. And if you talk to police reform advocates, they will tell you that this has led directly to Chicago's wrongful conviction crisis. Because if you are held in an interrogation room and you are sort of pressured perhaps by a police officer, there's no way for you to reach out to a lawyer for help if you can't use a telephone call. And I want to be clear that this is a separate consent decree as opposed to the one that was issued in 2017. So that tells you just how deeply these issues run. And this agreement will not only require people to get access to a phone call no later than 3 hours after they're detained, they'll get 3 phone calls in that 3-hour period, because that's a reasonable amount of time. That's part of the new criminal justice law.
It's not just Chicago. Yes. There's this consent decree, but this will be a statewide change as part of the Safety Act.
Right. And this really comes as a result of the George Floyd protests in June 2020. There were hundreds of people who were arrested and held without access to a phone call. The Cook County Public Defender's Office was able to document that, and they brought the city and the police department to the table on this issue.
Into that documentation, Paris, how will this be monitored, and how will we know if CPD is in compliance with it?
Well, that's a very good question. I mean, this is something that the Inspector General has been following. We actually interviewed someone a couple of years ago, the family of someone who has since passed away, who was coerced into a false confession, and they never got a phone call within the first 48 hours. So, I mean, why do you, that's your basic right, the phone call, right to a lawyer, but also you're taken away, you might have family, you got to check in on them. There's so many reasons why this is so important, and advocates have been fighting for this, but I'm not exactly sure. I mean, I think this police department has to report this, right. But what is the recourse if it's not followed?
Well, now they can go to a judge and say, look, they're not living up to the terms of the agreement, sanction them, order them to do better. That is the mechanism of a consent decree, and it's really advocates, reform advocates' best shot at making Chicago police live up to the letter of what they've agreed to do.
And part of this, and Heather and I were talking about this earlier, there's part of this bill is you have to put a sign up in police stations sort of informing you of your rights, you know.
A phone number to call.
Phone number to call for public defender, all that kind of stuff.
Right, so that people who have been arrested can obviously make the request if officers aren't, or just conveniently not giving it to them. Amanda, a little bit of time left. Let's talk about the Supreme Court. Democrats currently hold a 4-3 edge in Illinois Supreme Court. Political observers, though, think Republicans might possibly win a majority on the court in November. In 45 seconds, why do they think the Democratic majority is vulnerable?
Well, we'll get more on this before the election. Chicago Tonight is going to cover these things, Brenda, so never fear. We'll have more than 45 seconds on it. But the long shot is really that there's a rare opportunity where you have two essentially open seats. Normally, you have justices that stay for a long time, and they just have to run for retention versus a more candidate face-off. And so that is where there's a rare opportunity, and you really just have to win these two seats in sort of purple areas.
Got it. Thanks, everybody. Good to have you here. Paris Schutz, Amanda Vinicky, Heather Sharon in the Chicago Tonight studio.
Good to be here.
Yes. He was just 22 years old when he launched the Chicago International Film Fest. Michael Kutza was advised to lie about his age to make himself seem older and more experienced. In 1965, with the help of a silent film star, and later with a little assistance from Sophia Loren, Sidney Poitier, Jack Nicholson, 1,000 others, he created a film festival that brought the world to Chicago. Now he's written his life story in a new memoir. Producer Mark Vitale met him to find out how he transformed Chicago into an annual destination for filmmakers and fans.
The 1975 world premiere of One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest took place at Chicago's Granada Theater with all the stars present. It happened because of the vision and determination of one man who grew up on Chicago's West Side.
I was obsessed. Being a one-man show, which is what I was, saved a lot of money, but you got it done the way you wanted to get it done. It took a while for me to let things go, to have a team, a whole team, because I wanted it to be perfect, as I saw it to be perfect.
The world premieres and visits from superstars of cinema all started with help from silent film star Colleen Moore, who had retired in Chicago. Columnist Irv Kupcinet introduced them. That's Colleen Moore on the left at the Pump Room with Michael Kutza and the legendary actress Lillian Gish.
I met so many of these early directors and stars from Colleen. She was this widow, and I came along and sort of put a new spark into her life. So that's how I would meet Myrna Loy at lunch, or Lillian Gish at lunch, or Joan Crawford.
Kutza doesn't leave many stories on the cutting room floor in his memoir, Starstruck. He showed us around a home filled with memorabilia and told us how to run a film festival and handle unpredictable movie stars.
You take 6 months, you find the films for all over the world. Then you put them together and you put the festival together. Then you're faced with these directors and talents that you've invited here, and then suddenly you realize there's more than just inviting them to Chicago. They all have idiosyncrasies. They need a certain kind of wine in the car. Shirley MacLaine, I've got to have Pepsi-Cola. I need Pepsi-Cola. While, you know, Jack Nicholson is always smoking a joint, so he's always high, so he's easy to deal with. Back in those days. I respect the talent. I'm a fan. And I believe in honoring the talents in the film industry. And we brought them all here.
He designed the first Film Fest graphics and hired fashion photographer Victor Skrebneski to add some sex appeal. Kutza remains the CEO emeritus of the festival he founded more than 50 years ago, and he's had his hand in many festivals around the world.
But I was working for Berlin for 12 years, in Italy in 10 years, in Venice Festival, and I became programmers or helped him get a star there or something like that. And I took Roger Ebert to his very first film festival in Iran, because I was working in Iran.
John Wayne could get pretty nasty too when he wanted to be.
The Chicago Film Fest has presented first films from Martin Scorsese and William Friedkin and filmmakers from all over the world. And Michael Kutza has made a lot of famous friends along the way. His life story would make a heck of a movie.
The book's a legacy. The book is my story. I've certainly enjoyed the ride, and I want others to know what it's like. the ups and downs of putting together something like this. A lot of people have dreams of putting together something, whether it's a theater or dance or opera or film. It isn't easy, but it's worth it.
For Chicago Tonight, this is Mark Vitale.
Michael Kutz's book Starstruck was just released, and the opening of the 58th Chicago International Film Festival launches 1 week from tonight with a block party in front of the Music Box Theater. There's more to see on our website, including Kutz's stories about his encounters with Mayor Richard J. Daley, Anne Margaret, and Tom Cruise, among others. We're back to wrap things up right after this.
Chicago Tonight is made possible in part by Alexandra and John Nichols, the Jim and Kay Mabey family, the Polk Brothers Foundation, and the support of these donors.
And that's our show for this Wednesday night. Don't forget to stay connected with us by signing up for our daily briefing. And you can get Chicago Tonight streamed on Facebook, YouTube, and our website, WTTW.com/news.
And you can also get the show via podcast and the PBS video app. And please join us tomorrow night live at 7. A look at housing and preservation efforts in the Hyde Park community. We have a live report as part of our In Your Neighborhood series.
And the 4th installment of our permanent punishment series on getting criminal records cleared. Now, for all of us here at Chicago Tonight, I'm Brandis Friedman.
And I'm Paris Schutz. Thank you so much for watching. Stay healthy and safe, and have a great evening.
Closed captioning is made possible by Robert A. Clifford and Clifford Law Offices, a Chicago personal injury and wrongful death firm that supports free educational initiatives in the legal profession.